One of the characters says, "I'm a motherfucking fox. No one can catch the fox."
Ooh, got him.
Just
Can't catch him.
I remember laughing so hard at like 10 o'clock at night, where my parents opened the door. Was like, "What the hell is going on?"
He's like, "Can't catch a motherfucking fox." Bam!
So good.
They're like, "Honey, call the priest. Our son's been possessed."
I just remember reading it and just being like, "This is the funniest thing I've ever read in my life."
Welcome to this week's episode of the Top Podcast. I'm your host, Rob, and joining with me are my friends Lou.
Cow.
And Mike.
The joke continues, see?
Oh, gosh.
Ew. Canceled.
Welcome to Top Podcast with the dynamic duo. No.
I got this weird sense of deja vu. I don't know what it's coming from, though.
Weird. Probably the aliens. But each week we like to start off the episode with an
We should do a conspiracy podcast. That'd be cool.
Oh, yeah.
Go find a corner and stick your head in it.
I'm already in a corner. Where the chair is, but you know.
So like I was saying, each week we start off with an icebreaker. Feel free to ask us anything on our socials, on YouTube, or email us at thetoppodcast@gmail.com. But Mike, what's the icebreaker for this week?
So I'm curious what your favorite food item at a sporting event has been. For me, I went to a U of M game when I was younger. And all I knew it was some kind of hot sub. In hindsight, it was just a chicken cheesesteak. It probably wasn't even that good, but I'd never had a chicken cheesesteak before, and it blew my mind. And it's just stuck with me for all these years.
I know what you were thinking about today.
No, I was just desperately trying to come up with the icebreaker, and then Rob mentioned you playing football, and I was like, stadium food, done.
I don't know if this counts as one, but my college team was very poor, and so we had to work the concession stands. I can't remember which sport it was because I did football and I did baseball, but either one of those, either Ford Field or Comerica Field. I think it was Comerica. I worked a little Caesar stand or food place. I don't know what you would call it. And they would count everything, but they didn't count how much toppings I ate. And so I was spooning just meat in my mouth.
Yeah, the sausages, right? Weren't you shoving down sausages?
I was it wasn't just the sausage. The bacon and the sausage and the ham were all mixed together for that multi-meat.
The meat lovers.
Yeah.
He was loving that meat.
I had the worst diarrhea in my entire life, but at least I wasn't stealing beer. Some of my football coworkers were not drinking water, was safe to say. But then my favorite stadium food was just the toppings of meat lovers. My
real answer has to be on Ford Field for Thanksgiving Day. They sell turkey legs. So that's just super unique. That's cool. And it's honestly like the same price as like, maybe it's $1 or $2 more than a hot dog. And it's a big old turkey leg. So it's a good deal when it comes to stadium food. But my cop-out answer, which I don't think it really counts. I guess it counts if lose counts. But I was working for high school. We would go to U of M games, work a football game. And I've told this story on the podcast before. But I got pulled up to the booth. So they were giving prime rib to, all the rich, fancy, execs and everything. Great. So obviously a prime rib beats out a turkey leg. But I don't know if that actually counts.
I mean, sure. That works. What do you think Taylor Swift's favorite stadium food is?
She probably has, what's that list that like rock stars have? There's a name for like their list that has like their demands. Like, if I'm going to come play here, you have to have these.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I just heard it recently. I cannot remember the name though.
Mike, what was your list like when you would play at venues? Have a stage?
I forget a stage. Just let me plug into something and let's go.
I just picture you plugging into things that are not what you should be plugging into.
Plugging a guitar into like a power socket.
He's running his guitar through the coffee filter.
Just like a cup of coffee or something. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Hilarious.
And the bubbles go up. Mike, why don't you introduce us this week's topic?
Well, clearly we need to class it up a little bit around here. So this week we're going to be discussing our top 5 novels. We're doing one per series, so you can't have all 14 of the Wheel of Times.
Shots fired.
I wouldn't want 10 anywhere near my list anyway, so that's okay.
Fair. And then I personally went with one per author just because it helped me narrow down the list, but that was not part of the restrictions placed on everybody. That was just something I needed to get me through the editing process.
Well, Mike, why don't you tell us what your number 5 is?
My number 5 is Patrick Rothfuss's book, The Name of the Wind. I'm not a huge fantasy guy. I don't know if you guys have experienced this. When I start a new fantasy book and there's all the lore that they're introducing, but they're not trying to introduce it like you have no idea what's going on. They're trying to like subtly work it in, and then you just got to pick it up as you go. It feels like waking up in class for a final for a class you didn't know you had, you know? It's like waking up for a final exam and being like, I haven't studied at all. Like, I hate the feeling of starting a new fantasy book because there's all this lore and I feel totally lost. And this happened with that book too. And it actually took me a good chunk of time to get into it. And I actually put it down and then came back to it. And it turns out I put it down right before this part where I thought it got really good. And when I came back to it, it just completely enthralled me. It was the only thing I was thinking about from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed. And I was working my warehouse gig so I could listen, and I would literally listen 8 hours a day. And that was a point where I had a hard set rule. I wasn't listening to audiobooks outside of work because I was listening to audiobooks 8 hours a day regularly. This is the only book that ever made me break that rule, where I'd get home and I'd keep listening because I was just so obsessed. It's got a really unique and interesting magic system. The main character he's hyper competent. Like he's almost,
or that's what he wants you to think.
Or that's what, yeah, there's the idea that maybe he's not as good as we think he is.
As he thinks he is.
Sorry, I'm rambling all over the place. Yeah. Essentially what the story is it's this chronicler, his nickname is the Chronicler, but this chronicler of stories in the land tracks down this innkeeper, and he's like, I know that you're Quoth, and I want to get your stories. And he finally talks this guy into giving him his story so he can write it all down. And so it's this legend of myth essentially telling his story, even though you can see that he's no longer this powerful, like, legendary figure. And so you don't know whether he's exaggerating his own stories or whether, in my opinion, what I think happened is something happens between the end of his tale that he tells and what would be present day that, you know, has stripped him of some of his power. Like something went wrong or he made some kind of choice. But yeah, it's a super fascinating book. I was completely enthralled. I know Rob wasn't crazy about it, but it was one of the only books I've ever read that really made me like fantasy. There's 2 mainline books. We've been waiting on the third for like 8 years now. I don't know that it's ever coming, but as a result of this insane drought between books, the community has just delved into it, and there's all these theories, and you can just spend hours on YouTube and Reddit putting your own theory together and looking at all the things people have say, and it's very interesting. But actually the thing that I appreciate most about this book, sorry, I know I've been going for a long time, so I'll cut it here. I had basically given up on writing. It was something I tried for a very short amount of time, and I was just not happy with the tone of my writing. Which is just kind of the flow and the style, the voice. It's a very abstract term that you kind of just understand if you read a lot. And something just clicked. I read this book, and the way he wrote I was like, you can tell a story like this? You can do these things? And I decided to keep writing because I was so I wanted to write like he wrote. That was what kind of got me over the hump. And I've been writing for 4 or 5 years since reading this book for the first time. Aside from just loving this book, it holds an incredibly special place in my heart because it's kind of the thing that got me to stick with what otherwise would have been a flash in the pan hobby.
And I will say, Rothfuss does have some of the best prose in the game. Like
oh my gosh!
I think it carries more than the actual plot itself. His prose carries him more than that. Mm-hmm. That's I don't think that's a hot take, but that's no, my take
I don't either, honestly. Because like a little bit, the stories are kind of long and meandering, but he's just got really good characters that interact in a really just enjoyable way. And then the prose, and it is just mind boggling. Like the way he'll introduce little sayings, and he just like little small ways where he'll say something simple, but in a way I never would have thought to phrase it. And it's just, I am always blown away by the way he tells his story. Even if the story itself can drag on and be way longer than it needs to be, he tells it in such an like compelling way.
For a non-writer, what is a pro?
Pros are just kind of.
I actually have the definition somewhere because I didn't use it early on. It is written or spoken language in its ordinary form without metrical structure. So it's kind of just how they speak.
The way you write. Yeah.
Lou, what's your number 5?
All right, my number 5. I feel like I always have to give the explanation before I just start riddling on my 5. So, I mean, if you listen to the podcast, you know that I just started reading again. I visited my mom recently, and she has all of the books that I read pretty much as a kid all the way to my teenage years. And I was just super inspired by that. And so instead of talking about like my all-time favorite books, because I feel like I haven't read my favorite book yet, I'm going to talk about the books that I kind of grew up on that kind of shaped me a little bit to who I am.
I love that.
Yeah, because
that feeling is because you haven't finished A Prelude to the Forest yet.
I was about to say it's because you haven't started Dream Riders.
So many dead kids. So number 5 is Hardy Boys, The Tower Treasure. So if I had to be honest with you,
Boys.
Yeah, if I had to be honest with you, it came in a pack of different books, so I don't really have personally a favorite book. I just picked The Tower of Treasure because it was just the first one that came up. As I was doing my freaking book reports, like I had homework for this damn podcast, I noticed like some weird stuff. I was on some weird websites. Not that weird. Don't you guys have dirty minds? I found this like old school. You guys remember like how websites used to look like back in the day? Just like really old school, small fonts, big pictures. Mm-hmm. So I was like scrolling through, and so the person that quote unquote the author of this book was called Franklin W. Dotson. I just want to thank Mike. Yep, I appreciate that.
I'm literally looking at the picture right now because I wanted to see if it's the Hardy Boys that I read.
Yeah, is it?
Yes, it is. I did not have that offhand. I just want to make that clear.
No, I mean.
Happened to be looking at the cover.
Big Hardy Boys fan, Mike is.
No disrespect, my guy. What was I going with this?
That was not a good prose, what I just said right there. It's like Yoda.
Before all this, I want to thank Mike for butchering his first author's name. So now it gives me the right to literally say every single name wrong because I'm terrible at reading names. But I say all this to say that I don't think Franklin W. Is it Dixon or Doxson? Dixon. Shoot. That Dixon was an actual person. Apparently, back in like the 1930s, there was a syndicate writers who wrote a lot of children's books. And Franklin D. whatever isn't an actual person. There's just ghostwriters who just wrote children's books. And there was no internet back in the 1930s, so nobody really cared. I say this, I'll say Hardy Boys was one of the first books I remember reading that wasn't for school, that I just picked up myself. It's just if you never read the Hardy Boys, it's just a classic, old school, classic mystery. The Tower Treasure is about somebody who stole money, and there's 2 boys called Frank and Joe Hardy that have to figure out who stole some cash or jewels or something like that. It's an easy read. It's fun. It's informative. All right, Robert, what is your number 5?
Well, I was just waiting, just making sure. So I'm gonna bring down the tone here a bit. And I will say this is technically not a novel I guess it's a larger percent because Mike listens to this, but if you're like the rest of the population that doesn't know the exact word count for a novel length, this one is under it. It's only about, I think it's 3,500 words instead of the average. I think it's the standard 60,000. But this one, written in 1956, like I said, it's a hard-hitting book that is Night by Eleazar Wiesel, I think it is, and it's his first-hand account of surviving Auschwitz in Buchenwald. It won a Nobel Peace Prize. Like it's such. There's no way to explain like the atrocities that man did to another man in World War II. And I just think we talked about it. It's not going to make the pod. We talked about pre-pod. There's some pretty hateful stuff people are throwing out into the world, and it breaks my heart. And like, it's like going to the Holocaust Museum. You don't want to go. It's like, you're not going to have a good time. It's going to suck, but you need to see it. You need to know what this history is about. I should mention it's 144 pages, which is about 4 hours and 25 minutes. If you're listening to the audiobook, it's just so crazy. You kind of see how his family goes through the night of broken glass and his mindset where he's separated from his family. And that's the last time he sees like all of them except for his dad. And he ends up becoming like almost the protector and caretaker for his dad as his dad gets dysentery and gets sick. And it's just heartbreaking to read the atrocities he went through. One that comes to mind, just off the top of my brain, is near the end of his father's, I think it was the night his father died. He was crying out, Eleazar, like, help me, like, and all that. And his Nazi guards were telling him to shut up, and they end up beating him and just keep on beating him. And he's crying out to his son, and his son's getting mad at his dad because he thinks they're going to come after him next. And it's just like so heartbreaking to see what all this trauma and hatred and anger and pure evil can do to someone, especially as a kid, and how it must stick with him the rest of his life. It's not going to be a fun read, but you're going to come out a different person on the end. And for that in itself, I just cannot not recommend this, because it is a life-changing book. And I read it all in one day, and I came home, I told my wife, we need to watch something happy because I am depressed AF right now. So you don't have to do that. But yeah, I think everyone should read this, and it's just life-changing. And we can learn from the mistakes and just like not have the hatred of people's past and all that, and strive to build a better humanity, regardless of what your religion, race, personal beliefs are. And yeah, go read it. That's as serious and as deep as I'm going to get in this podcast. So don't worry.
All right.
I would hope.
Yeah, I was like, man, you're shooting from the hip if that's the number 5.
Yeah.
I can only imagine number 1. Yeah, I feel like I don't want to say anything because of how powerful what you said.
Yeah, we can just go to number 4. Hopefully, bring up the mood, Mike.
I was gonna bust out this whole Alex Jones bit about the Auschwitz just being trauma actors.
Oh my gosh!
And then you had such an impassioned speech. I was like, halfway through, I was like, maybe not.
Yeah, your mouse is like rotating on the exit button.
Just should I?
I was like, joke, yeah. Nope. I was like, I'll bring up the mood. It'll be fun. No, that ain't the time. All right, my number 4 is, and honestly, this is one I have such a hard time picking between 2 books. I went with The Wastelands by Stephen King. Basically, it's book 3 of the Dark Tower series. And book 2 and book 3 are 2 of the most interesting and inventive stories I've ever read in my entire life. As I've sat down and weighed the 2 today, I think 2 is the more complete book, whereas really 3, I like the first half of 3 more than anything I've almost ever read. But the second half is almost a whole new story. But essentially, I don't want to spoil too much. Essentially, in the first book, a character dies. And then in the second book, the gunslinger he's walking along this beach, and these doors start appearing, and he has to go through all these doors, and he goes from his fantasy world, Midworld, into our Earth at different time periods, and he starts pulling the people that fate have decided are going to be part of his team. It's called a quartet, is the term that they use in Midworld. So he starts pulling these people out of reality in different times, and in the process, he saves the life of the person who died in the first book before that person the timeline's a little fuzzy, but he saves the life of this person who would then later die. And so you start in the third book, you have the main character, the gunslinger, starts going crazy because him in Midworld and this guy who's alive in our world, but he's supposed to be dead. And because he died in Midworld, but he's alive in Earth, there's this weird psychic dissonance that starts happening with the character. And because the 2 characters are linked, they're sharing this weird psychosis. And they have to find a way to get to what's called a thinny, which is this one of the a thin place between the worlds where they can eventually find a way to pull this person into Midworld in order to reconcile both their insanities. And it was the weirdest time paradox sci-fi mixed with fantasy I've ever experienced, but it was so brilliant, and it's really hard to describe. Like, I feel like I just butchered what was an incredibly well thought out and elegant story. It absolutely blew my mind. I couldn't put the book down, and it was like nothing I've ever read before. And then the second half of the book is still really good, but that first half, it could be a book all on its own, and I wouldn't have complained.
Yeah, I'm disappointed the movie was trash. So it looked like it had potential by the trailers, but I heard it was just awful.
I'd be interested to see it because I know Jacob I mean, Jacob tends to have very positive reviews. Like if you look at his average score for a movie, it'll tend to skew higher than the average score for that movie on a large scale.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good mindset to have.
Yeah, I mean, he'd rather like things than dislike things. Like, it's no knock to him at all. It's just, it's also fair to understand where somebody, like, when you get a review from somebody, it's good to know where they tend to lean. Yeah, more pessimistic, more optimistic. He's told me that essentially it's like books, I want to say 1, 2, 3, and 4, like all run together, but also that it's because the Dark Tower is a loop through time and it repeats over and over and over. He's like, theoretically, it might actually be a different trip through the story. And he said a lot of things that made me go, oh, maybe it's not as bad as people have talked about. And maybe people were upset that it wasn't what they were expecting. Mm-hmm. And so if you go in with proper expectations, it might not be that bad. But I've never actually seen it. So it is something I'd be interested to check out, though.
That's like the one Stephen King series I've thought of reading.
The first 3 books are incredible.
I was gonna say, when should I cut off? I heard there's a point where it's just like it's not good after this.
It varies based on who you ask. Honestly, one's only okay. I think he wrote it in high school though, so you kind of give it like some slack. And then it's really like, it's the kind of book that's fun to reread. But the first time I read it, I was like, I don't get the hype. 2 is one of the most complete and fascinating books I've ever read. 3 is good. Another problem with 3 is that it ends on a crazy cliffhanger. King has this thing, he calls it what is it, like waiting on the wind. He writes when the wind blows, when the wind fills your sails, you write. Like his whole thing is like you always be ready, you always keep your skills sharp, so when inspiration hits, you can catch as much of the wind in your sails and go as far as you can. And he basically was like, the wind stopped blowing, so I stopped writing the story. And then it took 8 or 9 years for him to come up with the next part. And so the beginning of 4 is just the end of 3. Like he just wraps up the 3rd book and then is like, oh, now all of these people are together and they're like, hey, tell us a story. And then the gunslinger essentially tells a story about his past. And so it wraps up 3 and then jumps into a prequel. It's really weird. And then there's another really hard tonal shift at 5 and 6 where you meet you start meeting characters from other books, and I think that's around the point where he had sobered up. And so I stopped enjoying them around 5 and 6.
Yeah.
But there's other people who are like, well, I mean, a little bit.
I was just making a joke.
It's a weird thing.
I'm proud of you.
I get it.
I'm proud of you, Steven.
It's awesome that he sobered up, and honestly, he has written some of the new King is really top notch, and some of coked out of his mind Stephen King it makes no sense. You're like, how did this get published?
Lou, what's your number 4?
All right, my number 4 is the most obnoxious one out of the list. It's Alex Rider, Eagle Strike, 2003 by Anthony Horowitz. Sorry if I butchered your name. It's about a British spy, teenager. He was an M16 spy. I liked this book because it was just, I don't know, it scratched my little boy brain. In this spy book, Alex has to investigate activities of a ruthless billionaire intent on making the world a better place by deploying 25 nuclear bombs around the world to put an end to the drug trade. Oh. And yep, high stakes. It all made sense to me. 25 nukes. Why not? just an absolute banger in my eyes. I do not recommend this book. I would probably never come to this book again. But at the time, I was like, Alex Rider's doing good work, man.
Doing the Lord's work over there.
Doing the Lord's work. You gotta love it.
So is it like a James Bond ripoff?
It's pretty much a James Bond ripoff, yeah. I think my favorite part of book 4, if I'm remembering correctly, I couldn't pin it down. But at one point he becomes trapped in this maze-like video game. He was playing the video game for fun, and then he wakes up and he's in the video game in real life.
Jumanji.
And pretty much, yeah. Like a simulation of the video game. I don't know. I was just like, oh, this guy. And then at one point he gets shot in the heart and survives. All the crazy preteen things that you could think of to get a kid just excited to read was in this book, and I was all for it.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the British Secret Service is MI6.
Okay.
Was this character said he was an M16? Was that a clever semi-clever joke by the author, or did you just misspeak?
I'm assuming, based off of the book report that I had to do, since I copied and pasted off of the description, like I did all of my book reports growing up.
I didn't like.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
because
if I'm just calling you out and being a dick,
you are calling me out.
Okay,
you're calling me out. You are probably right. It is I, not M16. Very cool. Good job. Good.
I'm sorry. The OCD just started the second you said it. It was just like my brain itches. But yes, also, that would have been so funny.
I think it was a good choice.
I thank you so much. I try to bring a little pizzazz into the podcast. But yes, I apologize, United Kingdom. I know we have avid listeners. We are the #1 podcast in the UK. I don't know if you know that or not. Don't look it up.
Just take our word for it.
Just take our word for it. But yes.
Source, trust me, bro.
MI6. Yes. I think we're going to have Idris Elba in our pod.
Yeah, he's on the guest list.
He's on the guest list? Okay. Yeah.
Talk about the Dark Tower,
Oh, he was in the Dark Tower. You're right.
Him and Matthew McConaughey.
All right.
For our 420 episode, we'll get Matthew on here. So my number 4, I feel like I'm the Michael of this week's podcast because this was released in 1937.
Holy crap.
It is 304 pages long, which is about 10.5 hours on audiobook. Written by the man, the myth, the legend, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, and that is The Hobbit.
Oh, good choice.
I'm just going to read the opening to the book, and you can see why it's like he was prolific for his time and everything, but it's, quote, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and of oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort." End quote. And arguably that section, bam, start of modern fantasy right there. And this led to him. He wrote it for his kids. And I believe he actually wrote that section. One of his students turned in a blank thing for like a test. And he's just like, this is how you would start a story. And he wrote that. That's the urban legend for it. And it goes more in depth later. But he wrote basically a story for his kids. And it just exploded. And I think when it comes to Middle Earth itself, this is the most digestible piece of Middle Earth that he wrote and published in his lifetime.
100%.
And it's great as a kid and it's great as an adult. Like, it's a very enjoyable, easy read. I haven't listened to the Andy Serkis read through. I have it on Audible, but I haven't gotten around to reading it. But the person that plays Gollum in the movies does the narration. And I just think that that's super cool. And without Tolkien and kind of what he's done, not only is a great book, but like fantasy, as I said, changed forever with the publication of that. And then the Lord of the Rings. And then even with cinema, like it's had huge things on cinema. Without the Lord of the Rings live action films in the early 2000s, I don't think we get shows like Game of Thrones and things like that. Because if you look at 80s, 90s fantasy, not very good, very cheesy and corny. And Peter Jackson was turned down in a lot of places. So it showed that these can be profitable. And so I'm going to have the father of modern fantasy at my number 4. And it's just a great story.
Yeah, dude. The Hobbit is still one of my favorites. I definitely consired it.
Also one of my wife's favorites.
Yeah, it's a classic. I don't know. I can't for the life of me choke down Lord of the Rings books. I don't like it. And it blows my mind that the same guy wrote The Hobbit. Because I think The Hobbit it's so easy to read. It's so engaging. It's so good. I can't fathom why people read the Lord of the Rings. I like the Lord of the Rings. I like the audio drama. I like the movies. I like the story. I just can't stand his writing in those books.
Watch you for some reason like the Silmarillion. Like, you're just like, yeah.
That would be so funny.
The Bible, Lord of the Rings, love it. Love The Hobbit. Can't stand Lord of the Rings. Lou, have you read The Hobbit?
No, I saw the first movie. I can't remember the names of them. Not The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, The Fellowship?
Fellowship. So I saw The Fellowship. Was like, okay, that's cool. I saw the extended, then I switched to the extended version of the second book, and I had no idea what was going on. Yeah. I was so lost.
Might have been a choice for the first one. It might not have been the best way to do it.
Yeah, I might come back to it again when I'm sick. So I watched the second one when I was sick, and with a disease that I will not share on the podcast because I know a virus, not a disease. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
No comment. I mean, I clap when I need to, when it's appropriate. But yeah, I really couldn't. Honestly, the reason why I tried to watch Lord of the Rings is because it was an older woman that I really looked up to that just like praised the Lord of the Rings for like 4 hours. And I'm like friends with some of her kids. And I was just like, I I feel like I should show some respect and try to watch the Lord of the Rings. She was just like spouting I feel like has a negative term to it, but she was talking to us about the Lord of the Rings with me and Christian, but I've never seen it. But she was going in the most detailed way possible. And I was just like, I'm so sorry that I can't be on this journey with you.
No. I woke up way too early. Like, when you wake up super early for no reason and like you're not even like you're not even aware of it necessarily, but you woke up so early that there's no room for emotional health. Like you should have just gone back to bed. I got up at like 4 a.m, wide awake. I was like, what the? All right, whatever. I'll just get up. And for whatever reason, I was like, I'm gonna watch the Lord of the Rings. So I threw in Fellowship, and the scene where they're like the concerning hobbits is rolling, and they're just doing these wide sweeping shots of the Shire, and they're playing the music. And I just got overwhelmed by this idea that like the Lord of the Rings is kind of Tolkien's way of dealing with the war and explaining his story, and the idea that the Shire is kind of like the peace that they were fighting for. And I got super overwhelmed by it, and I just started tearing up, and I was like, I think I need to just go back to bed.
No. He hates allegories. Come on.
I don't think you can write that many pages without at least accidentally having some allegory.
Yeah, but that was his biggest criticism of Lewis. He's like, it's all an allegory.
It is all an allegory, but it's a good one. Although there are definitely points with Lewis where I'm like, try to figure out how this fits, and every now and then I have to step back and be like, it's still fiction.
What's your number 3, Mike?
My number 3, and this is another one where I just, it was so hard for me to pick. But I went with Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix.
Oh, no.
Not the one I expected.
Prisoner of Azkaban. Here's the thing: if your favorite is Prisoner of Azkaban, I got no beef. If your favorite is 5, Order of the Phoenix,
Half-Blood Prince,
right? Half-Blood Prince. Literally all 3 of those. I mean, it really just came down to which one I felt like talking about today. 3 and 6 are incredible. I think 7 is not on the same level as those 3 books, but I think it is the perfect example of how to finale a series. And 5 is an interesting one because I absolutely hated it the first time I went through the books. I thought 5 was the worst one. And so I would skip it most of the time when I'd reread the series. I couldn't stand it. And then I kind of took a long break from reading Harry Potter. It just kind of fell by the wayside. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to listen to next when I was working the warehouse job. And I was like, oh, you know what? Why don't we do Harry Potter? And 4 was my Goblet of Fire was my favorite for a long time. It was the first one I read cover to cover instead of watching the movie. And so I think I liked it because of that. And it had some nostalgia to it. But now I think it's one of the lower tier books. But it had been so long, I mixed up Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix in my head. And I was like, oh, hey, Libby, the library app, has the audiobook for Order of the Phoenix. I can just snag it right now. I got like 10 minutes in. I was like, oh, crap, this is the wrong one. I hate this one. Whatever, it's long. It'll burn up a couple days. And I re-listened to it, and I was like, this is incredible. I think Dolores Umbridge might be hands down, she's one of the greatest antagonists in all of books and movies. She's just incredible. There is almost nobody I've ever encountered in story that I love to hate as much as Dolores Umbridge. She just gets under my skin in the best possible way. There's lots of little things that J.K. Rowling does that I try to steal her techniques on. And this book highlights so many of my favorite storytelling techniques that she utilizes. A lot of people complain that it takes so long to get to Hogwarts in 4 and 5, but I think in 5 it's super justified because they spend all this time in the Ministry of Magic, and then the finale of the book takes place in the Ministry of Magic. And so at first it's like, why are we spending all this time there? And then at the end of the book, you get to just have the finale, and it's high paced and it's fast and it's awesome. And you're comfortable as a reader with this environment because you've already spent a couple chapters there. And so she doesn't have to waste any time acclimating you to the area. And I think that's just brilliant writing. Another thing that she's really good at is hiding critical pieces of information and foreshadowing and clues in these long lists of otherwise trivial and useless information. And so there's a point in 5 where they find a Horcrux and they don't even realize it, and it just gets tossed in a trash can. Like it's just another item on this checklist of things they're throwing out. And so it's got so many things that I think J.K. Rowling does as a writer that she doesn't necessarily get credit for, but that set her apart in ways that people don't necessarily talk about as much. And also, I think the story is really good. And I think the idea of angry, mopey teenage Harry gets a little overblown. He is a 15-year-old, and he gets a little moody, but it's a little justified. He's going through some stuff. It's the first book after he watches somebody die right in front of him, and he's going through it. And I think it's good character growth. And
actually, sir, the first book is the first book after he watches someone die right in front of him, because he watches his mom dying.
But he doesn't remember it as it.
I'm just being
now. I do get really worked up. I'll take my own glasses push up moment. The fact that you don't see the Thestrals until book 5 drives me nuts, because he sees Cedric Diggory die. And then theoretically, you don't actually. I'm going to say on screen because that's easier to understand. But you never they don't return to the train on screen. It just cuts to them being on the train. But he should have seen the Thestrals. And so book 5, when he's like, what are these? Like, I get from a nuts and bolts point that she hadn't even come up with the Thestrals yet, and it was something she introduced in book 5. But he should have seen them already on the way to the train, and that irks me.
That was one of my favorite parts about the beginning of Hogwarts Legacy. So you're just in this floating carriage, then it's in like the first 3 or 4 minutes, and a dragon attacks it and someone dies right in front of the characters, and you see the Thestrals like appear out in front. I just thought that was such a cool.
Yeah. I don't think you don't know who dies. You don't see, you just like, it cuts to the outside, and then the dragon bites down and the Thestrals appear, and you're like, oh, somebody just died. And like, it's such a great way of showing somebody just died without having to tell that somebody just died. So Fred and George, like, they escape on that one, and you have the line, one more lesson like that, and I might just pull a Weasley, which I use on the regular. I used it just the other day. People look at me like I'm crazy, but
Lou, you've been pretty quiet. Are you not a Potterhead?
Oh, I'm like a movie Potterhead. So my grandma used to take me to all the movies. So I remember, like, one of my fondest memories of my grandma is I remember going to every movie with her. But I cannot hold any Harry Potter lore in my head to save my life. And so there's nothing that I can add to this except for I have this like internal goal that I'm going to somehow read or listen to all the Harry Potter books at some point in my life.
Audible is a great way to do it. The narrator is world renowned. Like, he's a world class narrator. He's my mom's favorite narrator for The Christmas Carol. Like, the guy does Dickens when he's not doing Harry Potter. Like, he's incredible. Through 7 books, I think there are 2 minor errors in like just the voice. Like, I think there's a point where he accidentally does Vernon Dursley's voice when he's supposed to be doing Arthur Weasley's voice for like 3 words, and then there's a point where I don't think there's necessarily a dialogue tag at the end, so you could interpret who's talking differently, and so it's like, maybe he messed that one up. It depends on your interpretation, but like, he did an incredible job. There's so many characters, and he has a unique and engaging voice for all of them. Oh my gosh. I think that the audiobooks are such a good way to experience Harry Potter, especially because it's a lot of reading to do.
It is, yeah.
And I don't enjoy physically reading that much.
Is his name Jim Dale? Jim Dale?
Yeah. That's the one, yeah.
Okay. He did the Puss in Boots book too. It's like,
did he?
Hilarious. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if it was just me as a child, but I almost got the Harry Potter glasses. And I think that would have been absolutely cute to see this like chubby mixed kid with an afro wearing Harry Potter glasses.
Lou, what's your number 3?
Boom. All right, cool. So my number 3 is when it like rubber hits the road a little bit. These are books that I would come back to at some point in my life. So yeah, so my number 3 is the Harry Potter. Is the Hunger Games book, book 1 by Suzanne Collins.
Nailed it.
Ka-cha-ching. 2008. Absolute banger. Absolutely love it. If you don't know anything about the Hunger Games books, you've been living under a rock. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Where have you been?
Yeah, exactly. But just long story short, there's a big war. The capital won the war and then split the nation into districts, United States. One being like the most rich, and then 12 being absolute coal miner, dirt poor stuff. So our main character, Katniss Everdeen, is from the dirt poor stuff, and to make sure that the capital holds its power, which is on paper is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know who signed off for this book. The capital hosts death matches, 2 children from each district. I think ages like 8 to 17 at least.
8?
I'm pretty sure it might be 12.
That one girl that got the whole whistle thing she was super young.
She was super young. Yeah. At least do, in my opinion, at least do weight classes. Good Lord.
Right.
But,
Hey, there's no weight classes in Fortnite.
There were no weight classes in Fortnite. So there's death matches. They do death matches from like super young to pretty much 17. And the richer districts pretty much have like academies where people are training for the districts, and then Katniss is just trying to survive. So as a child, as a kid in 2008, I think I was in middle school, I absolutely loved it. And I think I loved it, the book and the movies, for the wrong reason. So this new prequel came out called The Hunger Games Songbird and Snakes. It was a prequel. I know I'm switching from book to book, but it was a prequel about probably the first Hunger Game, or the fourth Hunger Game. And it really opened my eyes as an adult of what the author was really trying to say. So as a child, I just really enjoyed Katniss just shooting people with bow and arrows, and I love the love lore and all that stuff. But I don't think I really understood what the author was trying to say. I think a really good example of this is there's a line in the book called "Stupid people are dangerous." I think that's really short and sweet to the point.
It's true.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that today, actually.
Looking at you, Nazi Germany.
Looking at you, Nazi Germany. And I didn't understand. I knew that the rich people of the capital were like the bad people, right? But I didn't really truly understand how money and how wealth can just make you less of a person. And it really affected me in the prequel. And it made me really appreciate the first book, because in the prequel, when they do the Hunger Games, there's no kids that are training to win, right? Some of these kids in the prequel, they're missing arms. They're super skinny because they literally just got out of a war. It took all the excitement of the actual game, and it really put in perspective of like killing is against human nature. And then Katniss, as she's a skilled hunter and she knows how to hunt, but she knows that like killing animals and killing people are 2 different things, and it's not right to kill people. And I know it's super easy to explain, but recently it really like opened my eyes to what the author was trying to say, and it was just, I don't know, it was cool for me to understand it. Have you guys read The Hunger Games?
I have not.
I read it. So I got this thing from school. I do not remember the details well, but essentially it was like, hey, you're low vision, so we're going to give you this program that will read your audiobooks to you. And also, so like the books we have to read for school, you can get it'll read it for you. Also, here's this massive digital collection of large text books that you can read. And the Hunger Games were just in this random like thumb drive I got from school, all of them.
Interesting.
And so I literally sat in my bed with like a computer on my desk, massive print, and I started it and I read it in 2 days. I was just like, I've never been so hooked by something in my life. And then I was like, I got to read the next one. Actually, I just read this whole thing in 2 days. I need a break. And I never went back.
Yeah, I think I remember you saying that. The first one I think is good. The second one, I don't know. The main antagonist is the president named Jon Snow. And I really, after watching,
is it Jon Snow?
No, it's not Jon Snow.
Okay, I was gonna say that seems kind of copyrighted right there.
No, it's not Jon Snow.
I know the last name Snow. Yeah.
Yeah, the last name is like President Snow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I understand like his reason for the way he acted, but yeah, I totally understand.
My number 3 is the Crimson Campaign by Brian McClellan. That is book 2 of the Powder Mage trilogy, which came out in 2014. It's 640 pages, which is roughly about 20 hours. And since it's right in the middle of a trilogy, I'm not going to try to sell you on plot or anything. Just this was my favorite of the 3, but I'm going to try to tell you kind of about the world. So the thing that's really cool about the Powder Mage world is that it's think of a Victorian era gunpowder fantasy. So it still has like your magical elements and things like that, but then there's also some industrialism to it. So it's not steampunk, so it's not water powered, but you still got gunpowder and things like that. And along with the creation of gunpowder, there's these people that learned that using gunpowder, they get these magical abilities, and they're called the powder mages. So some of the stuff they can do is they actually like ingest gunpowder, and it gives them like heightened strength and senses. So you got these like death machines walking around just always snorting powder. So they're 100% just like all drug addicted and drugged out on gunpowder. With that, they can also detonate gunpowder just with their thought. So it doesn't matter if it's raining or anything. They can set off their gun cannons, or if they're trying to blow up a target and they sense gunpowder there, or they put gunpowder there, plant it, they could remotely blow it up with their minds. And with being able to do that, they can manipulate the direction of things launched by gunpowder. So say you're trying to shoot a bullet at a powder mage, they can use the gunpowder and deflect it and curve it, or launch it and have it come back at you. So they kind of almost have this telekinetic sense, or they can burst some packets of gunpowder and launch themselves up in the air. And it's just such a cool and unique magic system. And I love, the Victorian era. It's that Civil War style. And it's such a great, well thought out, well written series that I'd recommend it for anyone that likes fantasy. Go check it out, especially if you like Victorian London, that French Revolution-esque, aesthetic and everything. It's just a good time.
That sounds like a straight up fever dream of a book.
Basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Very cool.
So if you see me snorting gunpowder, I'm just trying to turn to a powder mage,
It is like snorting gunpowder and then flicking your wrist. Like,
come on. Oh, it does not taste good, let me tell you.
You've tasted gunpowder before?
Yeah, it's a war enacting,
Oh, yeah.
Because on the movies, they all rip it off with your teeth. So a lot of new people, myself included, you want to look cool. So you rip it off with your teeth, spit out the top of the cartridge, and then pack it in your musket. But it does not taste good. So you'll notice a lot of the veterans, we rip it with our hands. Veteran Civil War reenactors, because we're just like, we don't want to taste that. Then it turns your mouth black and everything. No.
So are you guys shooting people? Are you guys shooting things? People?
So it's just blank. So the cartridge is just a bit of gunpowder. You put it in there, and then you cap off your rifle, and just goes boom. That's all it does. There's no projectiles or anything in them. In most events, you don't even. This is the classic ramrod that you see people put out, and they push down a bullet is what they would do with a muzzle loader. If you're a hunter and use muzzle loading, you know that. But for the most part, for safety, we don't even touch the ramrod, because some people are dumb and will leave their ramrods in the musket, and then you do have a flying projectile coming at you. So
holy crap!
Luckily you're standing far enough away where usually it'll just go and land in the dirt if that did happen. But most places you just nix it and you're just gonna pour the powder down there and cap it off.
I just want to be a fly on the wall on these things. I am so intrigued.
Dude, I wish I had a GoPro for some of it and just like had it hidden somewhere.
Just absolutely crazy. I don't know. Like, I just would love to watch a bunch of white people just having fun,
Hey, we'll get you in there.
I appreciate it. I the more I'm hearing about it, the more I don't want to participate. I literally just want to be like behind a tree and watch just a 40-year-old man who has a really like weird job, crappy job, just having fun,
It's just LARPing, just more socially acceptable. Well, I guess LARPing's even becoming socially acceptable nowadays.
It's true.
But at the time, I'm just like, I'm never going to LARP. And then we go on Civil War reenact. Because, totally different. It's historical.
Exactly.
And I'm like, I'm blowing up these with my mind. Bah, no.
Could you imagine if you like did... If you did it was like, what are you doing? It's like, have you not read this book?
Just think about it.
Just think about it.
Yeah. And the first book starts off, it's in the prologue. It starts off with a coup. So it's pretty crazy how these powder mages overthrow the regular, your regular elemental mages, and they basically stage this bloody coup and everything. That's chapter 1 right there. So go check out the Powder Mage trilogy. Mike, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is Speaker for the Dead. Not one of the more popular books on my list. Much more well-known book is first book in the series. It's Ender's Game, which many more people. Scott Card, okay. Yeah. The guy. So if you're into Brandon Sanderson and you've ever watched his class online or taken it in BYU, I believe he took over after Orson Scott Card stopped teaching the class.
Scott Card's a Mormon?
Big Mormon.
Did not know that.
Yeah, there's actually like you can see it in a lot of his books. There's little things that you sprinkle in, and you're like, one of my favorite. It's so stupid. There's this like, it felt like an accusation. Like to call it a theory doesn't feel right, but people would be like, no, Orson Scott Card is gay, and they'd be really angry about it, and you'd be like, based on what? And you'd be like, there is no sex in any of his books. And I was like, that's the criteria?
To be fair, I mean, it'd probably
guys, I have
gay
a
people like to have sex.
I have a confession, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Like it's like, do you like? And it was always church people who would say it. And I was like, do you think C.S. Lewis was gay? What about Tolkien? Yeah, like I was like, there's so many books without sex. For all the books with sex, there's that. And
it's true. The Bible does have sex, so we can confirm God is not gay.
Right? God is not.
We got him. Take that, atheist.
All the other MCs, I wish them well, but if you live in sin, you burn in hell.
Got him.
But so essentially, you have Ender's Game, which I also like. I really had to fight between which of those two to pick. And Ender's Game is so actiony and fast paced, and Speaker for the Dead is not. It is much slower and more philosophical and contemplative. But essentially, you have a multi-thousand-year gap between book 1 and book 2, where Ender gets on a spaceship and he moves at near light speed. And if you're not into sci-fi, essentially, when you're moving at rates that are almost at the speed of light, you have this relativistic time property that takes place where the people not in the ship are experiencing time at one rate and you're experiencing it much slower. So if you spend 8 months on a spaceship traveling from one planet to another, you might come out of that experience and find yourself 300 years in the future.
Well, this little maneuver is going to cost us 51 years.
So essentially, Ender and his sister have outlived everyone else they've ever known. It's just them, and they're like these weird relics of the past existing. I want to say 4,000 years. It's been a minute since I reread them, but thousands of years in the future. Ender is rich beyond the understanding of humans because his money has just been accruing interest for 4,000 years, where he just relativistically basically warps through time. And he's barely even the main character of this book. You meet this whole new family. Essentially, they're on a colony planet where they've discovered the first aliens since the aliens were wiped out at the end of Ender's Game. You know, so you have all these things in place, all these red tape, bureaucracy, preventing the scientists from asking questions or giving them any kind of information because you don't want to poison the natural growth of these kind of primitive creatures. And you have all this, so you get to meet these scientists and their interaction with these new creatures, the Pequeninos, and everything seems to be going really well. And then the Pequeninos kill the lead scientist in this brutal murder. Like you find him vivisected and his organs are all set out and he's staked to the ground and he's got grass in his mouth. And it's really crazy that you got this young girl whose parents essentially they died, but they were scientists and they cured this disease that was on the planet. And so her parents are these incredibly famous people and she wants to be a scientist, but she's all dark and broken and brooding. And she found a home with these two scientists, the head scientist and her son. All of a sudden, this new father figure she found is dead. And so she puts in a request for a speaker for the dead, which are these people. It's this new fringe religion that Ender accidentally starts at the end of Ender's Game, but has blown up since he's been traveling through time. But he technically is a speaker for the dead. And so he accepts this call, essentially, to come and speak the life of this dead scientist. So you have this mystery going on in this thing of we're still studying these aliens, but why do they kill this scientist? And then, Ender gets there and, his whole thing is he's got to what the speakers for the dead do is they essentially give a eulogy, but they don't pull any punches. It's purely honest. It's let's tell the actual story of this guy's life. Let's not sugarcoat it and say nice things about them because they're dead. We're just going to be totally truthful. And by the time he's arrived, the son has died in the exact same way that his father died. And so you had this mystery of why do they keep killing off the lead scientists? And then somebody else calls for a speaker for this other guy who died, and he ends up he has to speak these 3 deaths, and you just learn this crazy story of all the interpersonal relationships going on in this small village on an alien planet, and you learn what's going on in the aliens, and it really is it turns into an incredibly beautiful and thoughtful story just about the nature of people and the nature of interacting with strangers. There's this concept called the hierarchy of strangeness, I believe it's called. Again, it's been a minute since I read these. I've read them a bunch, but it's just been a second, where there's strangers of a different race, and then there are strangers of a different species, so aliens, and then there's strangers of a different species that you can't communicate with, and then there's hostile aliens that you can't communicate with, and they all have these different terms. It's an interesting way to think about how we view differentness, because you have this sci-fi layer of aliens to make it easier to digest, but you can very easily stop and be like, okay, now let's apply this to like humans, and how we interact with each other, and how things that we don't understand about different people can make them seem super alien and inhuman. It's really I like allegory. We've kind of established that at this point, and it's got a ton of very interesting allegory. And so, yeah, it's slower paced than Ender's Game, but I think it's the superior book. I think it's beautiful.
Well, what's the Ender Game? It has to do with this kid who's really good at shooting aliens. Am I in the right realm?
You were in the right ballpark. Essentially,
okay.
Ender's Game, the concept is aliens attacked a long time ago, and we fought them off twice. There were 2 invasions, and we beat them. And we beat them because this hero, Mazer Rackham, was able to save the day. And now Earth is preparing for the 3rd invasion, and we have this school for genius children up in space, where essentially we sift through all the kids, and we try and find the smartest. We try to find the next Alexander the Great and the next Napoleon, people whose mind works for military strategy. And we pluck them out, and we send them to space, and we train them to be the next generals in the war. Ender's Game is interesting because I think you could write an entire book report or essay on the title alone, what actually is Ender's Game, because there's all these different games that you could point to throughout the book and be like, this is Ender's Game. No, this is Ender's Game. No, I think there's 3 main.
No, this
contenders.
is pod racing.
Yeah, there's 3 different contenders in my mind for what the actual game is.
Lou, what's your number 2?
All right, my number 2 is. So I don't know if do you guys remember when you first fell in love with books?
About 4 years ago now.
Wow, very cool. Yeah, you're too busy eating gunpowder.
When I really felt I'd read them off and on as a kid, but I didn't actually fall in love with reading until I started having jobs where I can listen to them.
That makes sense. Yeah, so there's a series called Maze Runner, and the movies are kind of trash. I wouldn't recommend watching the movies, but there is. So I watched most of my movies. I read most of my books at night, right before I went to bed. And there's only
that was primetime Pokemon time.
I thought you were gonna go a way different direction.
Come on, being kids. Come on, Lou.
I'm just saying, we all have to discover our bodies at some point.
I have a body.
Holy sh!
Yeah.
Y'all are corporeal too?
What's that D&D spell? It's called gas form or whatever.
Yeah, gaseous form or something like that.
Gaseous form. Yeah, I thought about casting that a couple times. I fell in love with the Maze Runner books. They were one of the first series of books that I've ever read. There's a part in book 2 that absolutely just had me gripping the book. That I just the not intention, the suspension. That's a car. The suspense in the book had me mind blown. I was fully just committed to the book. And the book 1 was really, really good, and it had a really good setup. And then book 2 came out just absolutely just blaring me in the face, and I was all for it. So if you don't know about Maze Runner, I didn't even say the book. So the book, my number 2 is the prequel of the Maze Runner called Kill Order. And so the reason why I explained the Maze Runner in that part is because it felt like the author took that part of the book that I love so much and made it into a whole book, and I was all for it. So if you don't know anything about the Maze Runner, there was a flare, how do you even say it? There was a
solar flare.
Solar flare. Yeah, I was thinking of Superman, Goku. It's not really much to it. It's about people that are trying to survive the pretty much a zombie-like virus called the flare. Your mind goes blank. You start like beating people up. I don't know. It's just a very simple, very straightforward book, but the suspense in it and the way that he written it was absolutely all for me. I read this, the only book that I ever read in one day, and I'm pretty sure it was a 300 page book. I don't know what was the book page limit for a novel, Robert?
It's not a page limit. It's 60,000 words.
Words. Exactly. I have no idea on the words. I didn't count them.
300, you're probably good.
Am I in the right ballpark? I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to recommend Maze Runner. My number one, just like for spoils, one of my good friends read number one like last year, and she said that was one of the worst books she's ever read.
Yikes.
And it absolutely broke my heart. So I probably will never go back to my number one. I'll never read it again because I want to keep that same love for I have when I was a teenager. So I can't recommend Maze Runner, but as a teen, it did it for me.
Is it just because it is like very teen, like it's written for teens? Is that why you can't recommend it?
It's hard because a lot of these books I read over 10 years ago. So I have no idea how they hold up. I don't even know idea if it's like a Dr. Seuss moment, if one character goes blackface and sings a jingle. Like I have no idea. Red fish, blue fish, blackface, who fish?
Go fish.
Who face?
But as a teen, I'm just saying as a teenager, it was my favorite book at the time.
So my number two, published in 2005, it's a hot take, I think, or at least it was in the past, but it is A Feast for Crows by George R.R. Martin, which is book 4 of the Game of Thrones series. Why is it a hot take? People just don't like it. It doesn't have a lot of, like, Jon Snow has mentioned it, but didn't have any of his POV chapters. It doesn't have, like, I don't think Sansa's in it, but it doesn't have the quote unquote big ones. Jaime is probably the biggest name in there. One of the reasons why I love book 4 so much is up until that point in the show, it was pretty faithful to the book. So seasons 1 and 2 were books 1 and 2. And then seasons 3 and 4, which are like the most beloved seasons of the show, was book 3. And after that, they just went off in their own plot. And I watched the show first, so this was very much new stuff to me. Like there's some overlap with some of the characters like Cersei and all that. But there was so much new stuff that it was a joy. It felt like a whole new experience to me. And in my opinion, I liked a lot of the side characters that they had, the quote unquote side characters. And Martin really adds to the mystical part of the world in here. Like it introduces this character called Euron Crow's-Eye Greyjoy, which arguably the show did the most dirty. His whole motive in the show is he wants to stick a finger up the queen's bum. But in the books, he is this person that's like basically churning himself into an eldritch horror, like this Cthulhu type deity. It's been prophesied that basically he's going to bring the apocalypse down on Westeros. And it is some of the most like vile villainy stuff. Like you think characters written to do evil just for evil's sake usually are very boring. But this guy is just, Martin writes him so well. And it's just so interesting and all the stuff he does and how it's tied into the deep magic of the world. And then there's, stuff with Old Town and the deep magic there. And on top of that, it has Jaime Lannister, which is probably my favorite character in all of Game of Thrones. One of the best redemption arcs in literature. He goes from very first chapter of Game of Thrones, he's pushing a kid out of a window because he walks in on him sleeping with his sister. So obviously, at first you absolutely hate this guy. And it's crazy that the community just loves him by the end of book 5, where we're at right now. And it has some of the best female point of view characters, especially for like a more medieval perspective. There's this character called Brienne of Tarth, and she's your most typical like Hollywood strong woman type thing, but she's written in a sense that like this is not the normal for women, and she gets a lot of flack for that, and she has to fight through it, and it's just crazy seeing how much crap she gets for it, and she has to struggle like more because of like her strength and all that. And it's crazy just what she does and the fights and kind of things that she goes through in there. And along with that, you get Cersei Lannister chapters, which you see the manipulation, which she's not the best at in the books. And just kind of how she works using secrets, lies, and deceptions and all that. One last thing is, if you've never read Game of Thrones, I'd highly recommend it. George R.R. Martin is another fantastic prose writer. I was watching an interview with him and Stephen King. And Stephen King, historically not the biggest fan of fantasy. He thinks they're boring. But I just remember he's like, Game of Thrones, surprisingly a page turner, which for saying something for Stephen King, because he doesn't like, I don't think he likes Lord of the Rings. He doesn't like Wheel of Time and like the classics of fantasy.
Whoa, hold on. Stephen King loves Lord of the Rings.
Really? I thought I heard that he didn't.
No, you got that backwards. That was the Wheel of Time was his. The whole thing is his. It's like him doing his version of Lord of the Rings. Like that's him. Like
I mean, Dark
trying
Tower?
to. Yes, excuse me, Dark Tower. Yeah, it's his ode to Tolkien.
Okay.
He loves the guy.
So I messed up there. But I know he absolutely hates Wheel of Time because he thinks it's boring as all get out. And maybe that's why I thought, because it kind of, there's some similar Tolkien-esque things. So maybe it was just a misconnection in my brain. I don't think I said it. It's 784 pages, which is weird because it ties the exact amount of page count as my number one, which is 34 hours of audiobook. If you thought the show went down after season 4, it's crazy. I don't know why they didn't go with this. Like, it's just wild how much the writers started becoming complacent. And book 4 is my favorite.
I have not watched past episode 1, and I have not read any of the books.
Would recommend.
I have.
Wow, that's very surprising.
I watched the first episode, and I was like, I think I've seen enough twincest. I'm all set. I'm good.
You don't actually get any point of views of the twincest in the books, so that's a plus. It's also not as sexual. The show, they were told they basically had to put as much, nudity in there to try to sell the show as possible. So it's not as graphic in that sense in the books, but it can be just as brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you took out all the nudity in the Game of Thrones, it would still be one of the best TV shows of all time still. Mm-hmm. What do you think about Hodor and how they did him?
I like the twist with Hodor. That hasn't happened yet in the books. And like Rothis, even more famously, Martin is, I think the last one was released in 2011 was when the last Game of Thrones was. So we've been waiting for a long time, and it's always like, oh, we're almost there. Or the dragons are coming is the South Park joke. But it's going to be really sad if he doesn't at least get, the next book out, wins a winner. But we'll see what happens with the series. But it is just some of the best fantasy you can get.
I could go on and on. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I think I didn't have a problem with the last season, except for what they did to the winter. Was it the Winter Knight or Winter King?
Night King.
Night King. That's the only problem that I truly had. And letting a cripple be king, I think, is absolutely insane.
They didn't have a good reason for it.
Yeah, exactly. They say that he had the hardest life, so he needed to be king. But
no, he had the best story. That was
best story. Yes. I think I didn't have a problem with it because I just binged through everything. I didn't watch it per season, so I didn't have to wait.
Yeah,
to see this like crazy ending. And then Brianna Toth is hands down my favorite character.
She is so BA.
Yeah, and then the fact that how they built up the Hound in a certain way, and then absolutely just Brienne just absolutely just hanked his ass. So cool.
I watched the show first, as I said. I was like Lou. I binged it, but then I think the second episode of season 9 was coming out right when I caught up to it. I did it during finals, which I would not recommend. But hey, I graduated. You said Brienne's your favorite character, though, Lou?
Yeah, I mean, all the characters are probably the best written characters I've ever experienced.
Mike, why don't you bring us on home with your number one?
My number one is a book called The Last House on Needless Street.
Ooh, I'm surprised. It's number one.
I've only read it once. It is a very dark book, but it has one of, if not the most beautiful and uplifting endings out of any book I've ever read. It's wild. I tried to describe it to people as I was reading it, and my best description was it's kind of a mystery, but it's not so much a whodunit as a what the heck is going on. The first chapter starts off being narrated by this guy, Ted, and it's 10 or 11 years to the day after an event that he calls Girl with Ice Cream Cone, where essentially girl went missing, and because he's just a weird guy who lives alone at the end of the street in the area, somehow he was a suspect, and he got like doxxed by the newspaper. And so everybody assumed like, oh, this guy definitely kidnapped this girl, but the police showed up and there was absolutely no evidence that he did so. And then he proceeds to start hanging out with his daughter, who's just the right age. And you're like, oh, so is this girl, did he kidnap the girl? Is this actually his daughter? What's going on? And you're a little uncertain. And then the next book or the next chapter is narrated by his cat, and it's all from the perspective of the cat. And the cat refers to all humans as Ted, but she refers to the main character Ted as her Ted, capital T. And it's just it's like, wait, what? I'm sorry. Like, and then we get this new plot point of this girl who's decided to move into an abandoned house on Needless Street because she's learned about Ted, and she's been searching for her sister, the girl with the ice cream cone, for 10 years. And so she's convinced she's going to find her sister and bust Ted. And it's this absolutely mind-bending psychological thriller where sometimes it's from the perspective of this girl looking for her sister, sometimes it's from the perspective of Ted, and Ted is clearly unwell. Like, you can't tell what's going on, whether it's trauma in his past or if it's some kind of neurodivergency. You can't put your finger on it, but you know Ted's different. It just constantly has you going through this cycle of reevaluating and changing your opinions on the character, and you don't know who the good guy is or who the bad guy is. It's wild. It's mind-boggling. There's also another cat called Midnight, and there was a point where I was convinced, like, hands down, the only answer is that Ted and the daughter and both cats are all the same person. Like, and it was just one of like 35 guesses. I was texting our buddy Lucas, and I was just like, dude, I'm reading this book, and this is how like screwed up in the head I've become. Is that like, this is my best guess. Yeah, it's one of those multiple kind of reveal things where you're like, oh, okay. Oh, but there's more. Oh, and there's more. And each of them is just more interesting than the next. And by the end, you're like, wow, for all the dark depth and just the brutality that I put myself through reading this book, when you come out the other side, it is actually just so beautiful. So hopefully I didn't give too much away.
I think it's about a 10 and a half hours on audiobook.
Yeah,
I have it. It's on my list. I just haven't gotten to it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not too terribly long, but absolutely just a wild time. I know a lot of people I've heard say, like, I don't like to read books that are just dark and leave me depressed. And I totally get that. But this one is worth your time because it does have an incredibly happy ending.
Lou, what's your number one?
All right, my number one that my friend absolutely pooped on and broke my heart is Looking for Alaska by John Green, 2005. So it's about a male teen who leaves his old school and goes to a boarding school in Alabama.
Nope.
Based off of a book that he read. No idea.
I'm sorry. The title is Looking for Alaska.
Yeah.
But he's in
Alabama. He goes to Alabama.
Alaska is the girl. That's
okay. Got it.
Yep. So you probably know John Green by Fault of the Stars. That was his popular book at the time. I don't know. I just wanted to be different as a child. I think this book was actually recommended to me by my English teacher back in like 8th grade. I don't know. Maybe I felt like a little too young to read this book, but I mean, here I am. I'm perfectly fine. So yeah. So as fine as I could be, except for
I'll give you that one.
Yeah. As fine as I could be. Shout out to God. He does it, doesn't he?
Shout out
He does.
God.
Shout out. God's not.
The original.
God's not
think-
gay.
Was that a world's first? Like, I've never heard anyone shout out God on a podcast before.
Here we are.
I don't think we're the first.
Here we are. America's #1 podcast. Don't look it up. So yeah, so it's about a teen who leaves his old school, joins a boarding school, finds that his roommate becomes good friends with his roommate, and then through his roommate meets a girl named Alaska. And just how the book is written as an 8th grader absolutely just felt like it was me. Alaska, for me, was the coolest girl of all time. And I was infatuated by Alaska. Just even the name just had me just enthralled. Is that the right word?
Give you chills.
It is.
It just gave me chills. It just did it for me. And so the main character doesn't want to be interested in Alaska. Alaska smokes cigarettes, so he starts smoking cigarettes. He tries to pretend like he doesn't like Alaska. Like, I feel like we all do as a child.
Classic.
When we were like, yeah, classic. Like, I'm not interested in you. I just want to be your friend.
Throw mud on you.
Alaska
Classic.
tries to get. I'm sorry. What'd you say, Rob?
Nothing. I didn't say anything.
Okay. Alaska tries to get the main character, Miles, a girlfriend, and he goes on a group date with the girl. He gets hit with a basketball and throws up on her. It's just absolutely, it just hit me, man. It was so good. This book, and then it completely just left turns it. It talks about grief and how young adult relationships and mental illness, and absolutely blew my mind on what a book could be. And this is why it's number one. There's a couple phrases, quotes that I love about this book. There's a Asian character, and this was before even my weeb days, or this is like just starting on how cool I thought Asian people were. One of the Asian characters says, "I'm a motherfucking fox. No one can catch the fox."
Ooh, got him.
Just
can't catch him.
I remember laughing so hard at like 10 o'clock at night, where my parents opened the door. Was like, "What the hell is going on?"
He's like, "Can't catch a motherfucking fox." Bam!
So good.
And they're like, "Honey, call the priest. Our son's been possessed."
I just remember reading it and just being like, this is the funniest thing I've ever read in my life. And then I'd rather wonder than get the answer I couldn't live with. It was like, whoa, this hit me hard. Hit me real hard. I don't know if I should recommend the book because my adult friend read it and was like, this is unreadable. She said I could barely actually read the book. It's so bad. But if you could go back in time in early 8th grade, 9th grade, I would recommend the book for you.
If you had a daughter, would you name her Alaska? Was that change your life that much?
No, Alaska.
So spoiler.
You can't
say that nowadays.
unalive yourself.
Thank you.
Yes.
Now people don't know what we're talking about.
Bastard.
So no, I wouldn't name my daughter after a character that I loved. That also, I mean, let's be honest.
Bro, you can't say that word either.
Unalive
yourself. I'm sorry.
Rage quit life, please.
I don't know if I got my point across. I was hopelessly in love.
To sender.
Oh god.
I was hopelessly in love with Alaska. I don't think I would name my child after a character.
That's fair.
I wanted to absolutely bone.
What I meant, like, you just like, it's a nice name. It doesn't have to be after them. You just like the name.
I don't know. I mean, I tried to name my sister. I tried to convince my mom to name my sister Susie. And my mom looked at me dead in the eyes and was like, Snoop Dogg had a song and Susie was in it. And Susie sucked a lot of dick in that song. So I'm not going to name my daughter Susie.
Well, that's just keeping it real. Come on.
Yeah.
It's my number one. It was released in 2009. And it's The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. It is my favorite Wheel of Time book, which, as we speak, currently Wheel of Time is my favorite series, my favorite literature series of all time. So I felt like a gimme for number one. I'm not going to go too much into it because this is book 12. That's a lot of backstory. I'm not going to even try to attempt to explain.
No, I want to hear it, Robert. Go for it. You got 5 minutes.
So to start us off, there's this guy named Lutherian Telemon, who was also the dragon. He banished the Dark One, but then the Dark One ended up obtaining the male half of the magic system, so he went crazy and killed his whole family. Created a dragon mount. All right, now we go about a whole era later. No.
I mean, you were killing it. I was into it.
I forgot that Wheel of Time had a male and a female magic split.
Yeah, and the male half is tainted, so all the people that touch or use the male, they call it like touching the source. But
use the male?
All the people that use the male magic end up going insane and killing everyone they love. And of course, the prophesied hero of the world is going to be a male magic user, so no one wants to be the Dragon Reborn. But this is 12 books into all that deep lore. It merely focuses on the main character, Randall Thor, and Egwene Alvir. I should mention it's also 784 pages and for 33 hours of your time. My favorite scenes, I'm not going to give you guys any context because there's deep spoilers there. Rand in Semirog, great scene. Rand doing a full Kamehameha of Balefire. If you know, you know. Egwene attending the Armelin's dinner party. Great scene. Classic is Varen, your dress is green, Mathwin. And then lastly, the very end scene, Dragon Mount. I knew he wouldn't do it, but the writing was so well that I thought there was a chance he might. Which is just crazy when you know there's 2 books continuing and there's no way this world ending is going to happen. But Sanderson did such a good job of writing where I'm just like, he's not going to do it, right? Like, there's no way. How are you going to do this with 2 more books? And I think Wheel of Time in itself is one of the best realized and fleshed out fantasy worlds, originally written by Robert Jordan. He ended up passing away, and this is the first one that Sanderson took over. He was a huge fan, read them as they came out, and it really kind of launched Sanderson's career too after he wrote the This is after he wrote Mistborn. And even just it's like a eulogy. It's like a foreword about like how much of an honor it is. It made me tear up a little bit, and I wasn't even reading these as they came out. Go check it out if you like fantasy. Wheel of Time is going to sound crazy, but if you get like 4 books in and you're like, nah, this isn't for me, go ahead and just end it right there. With the series, by the way, there's plenty for you to keep on reading. Just maybe this series is not for you. And yeah, it's my favorite book and my favorite fantasy series, hence it is my number 1.
Hell yeah, dude. That's awesome. Do you have them on
I think
hardcover?
that's fair.
I do. I bought them on so I originally bought them on audiobook, so I'm like, I'm loving this series so much. I bought them on hardcover. There's this place that does like super fancy custom made covers, and there's one they have for the whole 15 book set. That's the banner of the dragon that just looks beautiful, but it's like $200. So I just keep on saving like $2 a month, and eventually I'll have enough in 100 months to buy it, and then I'll probably be $300 by then with inflation at this rate. Lou, what are we talking about next week?
So next week we're talking about top 5 things that grind your gears.
Why don't we really grind my gears?
It's gonna be, you're gonna have to dig deep, but you can't talk about anything crazy like politics or certain religions or COVID.
Those Pastafarians, man, they really grind my gears.
To say, I noticed that you left race on the table.
Right.
Whoa!
I was kind of connecting
And gender.
This is the first 2 that came to my mind. Give me a break, but all silly stuff. Nothing serious.
Yeah, keep it light.
Keep it light.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Top Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please give us a like, comment, and subscribe. It goes a long way for us. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please give us a 5-star review and leave a comment. We'll read it on the podcast. Other than that, we hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Hope you toppers have a great day. Peace out.
You did good.
Bye.